I dim the lights in my voice and set a small picture on the mind's wall. A pale halo near the sun, dust like breath on winter glass. Do you feel how the brightness softens when we look with patience instead of hurry? We'll stay there for a while. In that slow margin where questions lose their sharp corners and become comfortable to hold. I'm here to keep you company as we coast through a quiet science night. We'll visit instruments and gently named ideas, not to argue them, but to let them settle. Shapes will appear and drift, and will follow with the ease of a tide. If a thought grows heavy, we'll set it down and watch the light change. Nothing needs to be solved at once. If it helps, choose one steady thing to rest on now. The hush between words, the weight of the pillow, or a soft rustle from the room you're in. Headphones can make the world smaller and warmer. If you like, set your phone to Do Not Disturb and let this play through the night. You're welcome to return to this series, to the playlists where calm learning waits for you like a bookmarked page. This is a place for steady listening and unhurried wonder. We'll keep our pace around the breath. A few facts, then a meadow of quiet, then another small step. No alarms, no hard edges. Only the sense that you and I are standing under the same wide sky and letting it speak at a human tempo. And now, I'll open the first door and we'll begin with the gentlest thing we can hold. A sunward halo, and the way it makes everything feel close. I keep a small postcard in mind. Early November, the sun low in memory, a pale visitor returning from glare to gentler skies. The air of the night room is steady. Stars feel unhurried. On the card, a soft bloom surrounds a faint core, the quiet halo that seems to breathe with us. We stand at the rail of a calm harbour inside our thoughts and watch light fold back into shape. From shoreline stillness, the scene widens. Ground telescopes wake after the blind interval and begin their careful following again. November nights are cooler, and the scattered watches, observatories, school domes, backyard rigs find the point and trace it across the dark. The motion is clean and slightly sunward at first, then drifting outward as the geometry changes. I write the dates in a corner of the postcard so they don't need to be spoken again and again. They hold on their own, like the mooring lines of a boat. We have a name for guests like this: interstellar visitor. Not bound to our sun before the first sighting, arriving on a path that will not close. The first we learned from was found in 2017, the second in 2019. Now a third has asked for our attention and our patience. Each taught a different lesson. Each left while we were still writing our questions. I think of them as pages. We turned in the same long book, the corners creased by many hands. Tonight, we do not race to the end. We let the paper texture slow the reading. The postcard has another date written in a softer ink. October 29, closest to the sun. The visitor passed inside the path of Mars, not close enough to feel torn, but close enough to wake whatever ices were ready to speak. When objects lean near the heat, surfaces open. Gas escapes, dust lifts, and sunlight sketches long shapes into space. From our distance, those shapes look like handwriting. Some lines point away from the sun, as expected. Some lines appear to lean toward it for a while if our view cuts just along the right plane. We will spend time with that later, gently. Between the bright approach and the calmer return, Another eye looked from the side. A camera far from Earth circled Mars and turned in early October to watch from a different geometry. Side views are kindness. They give depth to outlines and make flat drawings feel honest. A single angle is a rumor. Two angles begin to be a face. I picture that instrument like a window in a quiet corridor, the kind you pause at without speaking. It did its work and joined the queue of many works that await a wider look. Let's put the postcard down and settle the room. The glow on the wall is low. Curtains barely move. Breathing finds a cadence that feels like the harbour's tide against pilings. In, a small lift. Out, a longer rest. For a short minute, we name nothing and let the soundscape be the story. A soft fan, the distant city hush, a fabric shift as you nestle deeper. The mind smooths its water and shows the halo again, unasked. We stay with it, and it stays with us. When we return to facts, they arrive quietly. The reappearance in early November drew many lenses back to work. The visitor's motion across our field quickened less each night as the geometry widened. Frames were stacked, and structures began to separate from glare. Plumes, tails, faint curtains of dust and gas, each with its own patience and its own reason. In this light, we practice the kind of noticing that is simple and forgiving. If an image shows more tomorrow, we accept the gift. If it shows less, we accept the path. I think about the word halo. It suggests a circle, but in space it is more like a hush, a brightness that wraps and softens. The quiet halo is a signal that the sun has reached into something that can answer with vapor and motes, with ions and ice grains that drift and scatter. Nothing supernatural lives there. Only physics with its gentle hands, making beauty out of push and pull. Radiation pressure organizes the dust. Magnetic fields nuance the ions. Rotation and sunlight carve a rhythm. All of it appears slow to us, though the distances are wild. When we speak of categories, the first visitor, the second, and now this, we can feel the pull to rank and compare. Not tonight. Tonight, we place them in one harbour, and let their wakes cross in soft lines. One taught us that orbits can nudge without obvious jets. One reminded us what a classic comet looks like when it comes from afar. This one asks us to sit with geometry and sunlight and the patience of release. The lesson is not that mysteries must be solved before sleep. It is that questions can be companions. There is a temptation to lean into drama when a thing returns from behind the sun. We resist that. The sky, after all, is generous without our adjectives. A long arc through heat and tide, a steady survival, and then a flowering of structures that many eyes can share. The side view images taken in October will become part of that shared seeing when they are ready. Until then, 1,000 careful frames from Earth's night places hold us over and hold us kindly. I fold the postcard and slip it into the book as a bookmark. The harbour is quiet. The quiet halo keeps a slow glow near the page edge of your thoughts. We have arrived gently at the place where the story can take its time. From here, we will trace how geometry makes a tale look sunward, how vents can draw lines that stay narrow for a while, how a radio whisper may speak of water broken into simpler parts. None of it needs to harden into verdicts tonight. The tide lifts and sets the hull. I dim the lamp a little more and let this chapter breathe to its edge, then fade with the shoreline's hush. I turn 3 quiet pages on a wide library table. The paper is cool to the touch, and each page holds a visitor drawn in soft pencil lines. On the first, the sketch is slender and oddly angled, as if a twig caught in twilight. On the second, the shape blooms with a simple comet's grace, a hushed head and a tail like chalk. On the third, the lines are more intricate, with textures that invite a slower look, and the page corner is already gently creased where many hands have paused. The first page belonged to a surprise that passed through quickly and left us with a question about motion that outpaced easy models. Its brightness flickered with a tumble, and careful tracking suggested a small drift from what gravity alone would have written. Some saw shards in the data. Others saw sunlight pushing on a broad surface. Still others traced more subtle paths through dust, gas, and shape. The lesson, set in calm type, was that our sky can hold behavior that is natural yet unfamiliar, and that patience is a method as real as any instrument. We set a ribbon there, not to dramatize, but to remember that some curves resist quick labels. The second page is gentler to the eye. A visitor arrived, looking like the comets we teach in first lessons, a soft coma, a long tail, and chemistry that spoke in familiar lines when prisms and receivers listened. It taught reassurance. It said, with no hurry, that worlds around distant suns make icy bodies too, and when those bodies wander through light and warmth, they behave in ways we have known from our own neighborhood. The page smells faintly of dust and linen, like an old atlas opened at a table where someone once traced rivers with a fingertip. When we closed that page, there was a quiet comfort in the room. The third page carries today's work. A survey telescope noted a moving point that did not belong to closed paths, and soon the community wrote a new name in the ledger of interstellar guests. The arc through our sky was steep enough to tell us this was a passerby, a traveller not held by our sun's long arm. With each night, details gathered at the page edges, a halo, threads of dust, hints of vents and planes where particles collect. As more images arrived, the corner bent back a little farther, a sign that we would be returning to this page often, not for excitement, but for steady learning. Let's rest the hands for a minute and let the room deepen. You can hear the small sounds that mean safety, a low fan, the softest tick from somewhere unseen, a door settling in its frame as the house exhales. The lamplight warms from white to amber, and the table grain becomes a slow river under your gaze. Breath moves like a librarian's careful step, measured, unintrusive, always there when you choose to notice it. The spine of the book loosens. The 3 pages wait without asking anything at all. When we return, we look at paths. Some orbits are loops that close, others are open lines that pass and continue. The difference can be written as a single curve, drawn with more or less stretch, yet the meaning is large. A closed path says home for a while, return again, seasons of approach and retreat. An open path says visit, learn what you can, then release your grip and watch the guest become a thin idea on the horizon. These open paths feel like comings and goings in a friendly station, where trains do not pause long, and that is simply their nature. Together, these 3 pages teach a simple trio of lessons I hold like smooth stones in the pocket. First, a moving thing can show small pushes that leave room for argument without leaving the realm of calm physics. Second, many visitors will behave in the honest old ways we already teach, and that is its own kind of wonder. Third, a newcomer can carry familiar signs and new geometry at once, asking us to refine our seeing rather than rewrite the whole book. The corners of the pages curl the same way, as if the air in the reading room knows this rhythm and keeps it. I like how the library metaphor steadies the mind. A page is not a verdict, it is a surface for careful marks. Margins welcome notes. Cross-references whisper between volumes. When we close the book for the night, nothing is trapped. It is all there in the morning, waiting under the same dusting of light. And for each visitor, we can place a coloured slip. Blue for the one that puzzled, green for the one that reassured, gold for the one we are still exploring. The slips peek out like quiet flags, reminding us that knowledge is a shelf we fill in shared time. For now, I return to the third page and press the corner a little flatter with my palm. We will trace its lines in the chapters ahead. A camera that watched from a side window near Mars, sunward threads drawn by perspective and rotation, jets that sometimes keep their shape longer than our first models expect, and a soft radio whisper that tells of water broken into simpler voices. As we move, I will turn the lamp ever so slightly, letting colours blend from page white into the dusk of the room, and the scene will ease from print to air, from detail to rest, as if a watercolour wash passed over and the outlines dissolved into night. I begin at the instrument and let the view expand. A craft the size of a small room loops Mars in an elegant 2-hour rhythm, its shadow skimming rust plains, its panels drinking light. On one side, a long square eye rides on metal trusses. Inside that eye, mirrors fold a narrow beam onto a detector that loves fine detail. This is our side window, the one I lean toward when I want depth instead of silhouette. From here, we can watch a visitor not head-on from Earth, but from the shoulder, where shapes reveal their thickness. On most orbits, the camera is busy with sand ripples, cliff layers, frost tongues, and the delicate braids of dust devils. At Mars altitudes, it can separate things only a handspan apart, a reveler for textures and grains. When it turns away from Mars to look far into the dark, the scale changes and the sharpness softens, but the geometry turns kind. A sidelong glance can tell you what a front view cannot. In early October, schedules aligned, and the mount flexed to its limits to point into interplanetary space. It's a quiet moment to imagine. The orbiter, a tiny balcony, the camera, a polished railing, and beyond it, the long street of the inner system where a traveller passes. Let's set down the page of numbers and rest for a minute. You may hear the room breathe, a soft fan, a small creak as wood relaxes, perhaps a distant car sighing through a turn. Light sits low on the walls. Your shoulders loosen by a finger's width, then another. The jaw settles, the tongue relaxes from the roof of the mouth. Breath comes in like a tide that knows the harbour and goes out with a longer, quieter line. In that stillness, the idea of a side window grows gentle. It is only a way of looking, a slower angle, a kindness offered to shape. When we lift the numbers again, they do not glare. The pointing happened as the visitor slid past the plane of Mars around October 2nd and 3rd. The separation was vast by human standards, tens of millions of kilometers. Yet, the alignment let the camera see along a different sun object line than Earth could manage. That matters, even when each structure is small in the frame. Parallax, phase angle, and the way dust planes glint under a low sun can all be teased from such a view. 2 angles begin to be a face. A third makes a head turn, from sketch into sculpture. Side views help because cometary scenes are thin and layered. Grains released from vents tend to settle into a plane near the orbit, like chalk dust finding the chalkboard's groove. Look straight on, and the plane stacks on itself, features blending into one bright wedge. Step to the side, and the sheet shows its tilt, the faint seams between threads, the way one plume crosses another before they blend. From Earth, in July and later into autumn, we had a nearly edge-on perspective at times, which emphasized a sunward line that puzzled casual eyes. From Mars, the camera's slant promised a clearer sense of which parts were truly pointing where. That is all we are asking of it, a whisper of depth. Data from deep space cameras does not go straight from photons to public galleries. It passes through calibration kitchens where bias frames and dark currents are subtracted, where scattered light is measured, where the subtle fingerprints of electronics are cleaned with practiced care. Teams check that pointing was what the plan intended. They note if a cosmic ray scratched a bright diagonal across the image. Sometimes a set carries an internal news flag because it will be paired with context and explanation, so viewers aren't left with raw puzzles. This doesn't have to be a drama. It can be a cooling rack in a bakery where loaves set before they are sliced, so the crumb stays whole. I remind myself of that, and my breathing lengthens again. For you, for me, a small safety cue helps the waiting. Lower the shoulders again by a shallow measure. Let the hands rest where the wrists feel supported. Notice the temperature near the cheeks and how it shifts on the exhale. We are not in a queue. We are in a quiet room. The sky outside will keep its rhythm whether we watch or not. Our work is to keep the tone steady so that when images arrive, we greet them without rush. Time matters, but not as a siren. As the visitor moves away from the sun after late October, its brightness fades. Gas releases slow, dust thins, and the long curtains of light grow more transparent. Telescopes stretch exposures, stack more frames, and still the signal-to-noise slides toward the background. A side view taken early, when the scene was fuller, is a gift to modelling later, when the hush returns. It can anchor the 3-dimensional guesses we make from earth-bound angles, set bounds on the thickness of planes, and show whether plumes were narrow or quickly fanned. Even a few pixels across, if timed and angled well, can teach more than a crisp but ambiguous stripe. I keep the image of that side window close because it represents a way of practicing science that feels humane. We do not demand certainty at once. We seek a second look from a different place. We accept that pipelines take hours and days. We thank the people who tend them. Meanwhile, we let community images from Earth continue their patient ledger. The nightly tail length, the way jets separate or merge, the soft halo's growth or fade. When the side frames enter the ledger, we will draw lines between them and all the rest, and a fuller shape will emerge. It will be plain, not theatrical, and all the better for that. So I end this stop on the observatory walkway with a quiet assertion. A camera above Mars looked out in early October and tried to see what we couldn't from here. Its pictures will travel the usual path through careful hands toward the open shelf. When we set them beside our other views, depth will appear, and with it, a little more ease. The side window is patience made visible. It is enough for tonight. What makes a strand of dust seem to lean toward the sun? The answer is geometry, drawn softly across distance and light. Sometimes the sky presents a trick of alignment, not to fool us, but to invite a steadier look. When grains release from a traveller and spread along its orbital plane, that flat sheet can, from certain angles, stack into a bright line that appears sunward. It is not disobedience of physics. It is a page held just right, catching the lamp, so a faint pencil stroke glows as if it points against the obvious. I picture the plane of dust like a loom's warp threads, nearly invisible, until the weaver turns it to the light. In that tilt, thin strands become the pattern. As Earth, the Sun, and the visitor trade places along their orbits, our view can cut along the sheet where fresh grains concentrate. The line of nodes, where our viewing plane intersects the traveller's dust plane, acts as a quiet ruler. Align the ruler with our sight, and the sheet compresses into a line that seems to lift toward the sun. Step aside in space, and the same sheet relaxes back into a fan. The effect is gentle, persistent, and it explains much that first looks strange. Back in July, when the season still held long twilights, a space telescope caught the scene almost edge-on. The sun sat just off the line of sight by a small angle, close enough that the dust plane's edge brightened into a tidy, sunward-looking filament. That view, so near to the sun's direction, emphasized the loom more than the flowing cloth. From that vantage, one thread became the headline. Shift the angle later, and the thread would blend into the wider weave, a reminder that perspective is a tool that can both reveal and disguise. I hold that dual truth the way I hold smooth sea pebbles in one hand, different surfaces on the same stone. Why should dust choose directions at all? The sun pushes. Light carries momentum, and when it strikes small grains, it nudges them outward, shaping the broad tail that points away from daylight. Ionized gases feel another hand, the solar wind sweeping them into a thinner, straighter streamer. These forces are not dramatic, they are patient. Every minute, a little push. Over hours and days, a pattern. Add gravity's gentle turn and the traveller's own rotation, and you have a subtle dance. Grains leave the surface, gather near the orbital plane, and drift into structures that make sense when seen from the side and seem perplexing when caught exactly along the edge. What looks like defiance is often just an overlap of planes. Rotation adds its small poetry. A vent on the sunlit face breathes, then the world turns, and the same vent briefly aims its breath in a new direction. For a heartbeat of motion, a plume can tilt sunward before radiation pressure folds it back and the larger wind takes control. Over many spins, such periodic breaths lay down threads, some outward, some briefly forward, that trace the visitor's rhythm more than any intention. It is easy to imagine intention in clean lines. It is kinder to look for repeated cause. When the cadence matches what rotation can write, we have a useful story to test against new nights. Let's rest the eyes and leave the loom lit but unattended. The room is safe and slow. A small hum from a heater rides under the quiet. Curtains settle after a tiny draft and then hold still. Your breath lengthens like soft yarn pulled from a skein. In through the nose, count 3, as if you are measuring a simple stitch. Out, count 4, letting the thread slip through relaxed fingers. If a thought arrives, lay it like a folded swatch on the table and return to the gentle pull. No new ideas are needed while the loom keeps its place in the corner, patient and bright. When we look again, the pattern has grown. In the days after closest approach to the sun, images from many places showed more than a single thread. Several distinct plumes and fans appeared to hold their edges for surprising spans, then softened, then separated again as nights passed. From one vantage, two sunward-leaning structures seemed to bookend a broader tale. From another, a faint ladder of features ran across the halo like rungs catching light. The counts changed with exposure and stacking, with sky quality and angle, and that is the humility of this craft. Even so, the sense of multiplicity stayed, not a lone thread, but a small curtain of them. A longer look asks us to hold two thoughts at once. First, geometry is powerful. A well-placed plane of grains can impersonate a beam that points the wrong way. Seen from a slightly different seat in space, the illusion softens into a sheet. Second, sources on the surface can be patchy, so vents open at specific spots and keep their directions for a while, drawing lines that stay narrower than the broad tail until mixing takes over. Neither thought demands drama. Both ask for careful comparisons across angles and dates, the way a weaver checks pattern from the front and from behind, and then steps back a pace to see if the cloth hangs true. I keep the phrase sunward threads because it is honest about what the eye sees and humble about what it means. Threads are not rods. They flex and blur. Sunward belongs to the appearance, not the fate, because physics will still carry grains away. When a thread seems to aim towards the light, we can ask, is this the dust plane edge, bright for a night? Is this event's brief aim, caught during a turn? Is this stacking of many frames enhancing a line that is otherwise faint? None of these questions argues. They are stitches we try, then check against the next row. We will keep checking. A side view from a camera near Mars will help tell whether threads had real sunward lean or only the appearance granted by alignment. Spectra collected from the ground can measure speeds and say whether these plumes behave like ordinary breaths of warm gas or something faster. Time series images, night after night, will show whether the threads precess with rotation or drift with broader winds. All of that can be done in a tone like tonight's, steady, appreciative, unhurried. Answers arrive more cleanly when invited by patience. The tide has gone out along the shore of this chapter. The sand still gleams, and the last wave's hush lingers in the ear as we step back from the waterline. I start close, as if kneeling by a garden rill. In the frame, a narrow plume holds its edge longer than you expect, like a thread of water that refuses to fray. The halo around it glows softly, a low mist of dust and gas, but this one line, this kept stream, stays coherent for a surprising stretch. A second line repeats the behavior, and then a third appears in the stacked exposure, not symmetrical so much as self-possessed. We linger on the texture rather than the count. The eye learns the look of collimation, when a plume behaves like a stream through a nozzle, instead of a splash from a bowl. Pull back a little. Typical comet scenes blur at the edges. Jetlets start sharp and then dissolve as grains scatter and eddies mix the flow. Heat changes, the surface turns, and the handwriting smears into the wider fan. Here, in several November images, the lines linger. They travel far into the halo before softening, as if the channel that feeds them is narrow and steady, or the grains are sized to travel together before light and wind sort them. It is not a defiance of physics. It is a reminder that surfaces can be specific, and that specificity can draw a clean stroke across a messy page. Think of a row of watering cans set along a garden bed. One spout is wide, and its stream breaks quickly into drops. Another has a gentle neck that sends a smoother ribbon that holds for a while before it beads. Rotation turns the row under a steady sun. Some minutes. One ribbon catches the light and looks almost straight. Later, a neighbor stream takes the stage. When the bed is viewed from the side, you can see how far each ribbon keeps its shape before it becomes mist. That is the feeling these frames carry. Multiple sources, each with a character, some drawing kept streams, some softening early, all drifting into the same bed of light. On the nights just after closest approach to the sun, more than one team recorded such behavior. You can trace several plumes that remain distinct across a large fraction of the visible halo, which itself reaches out to distances that, in captions and logs, are placed in the realm of hundreds of thousands of kilometers. The pictured length depends on exposure, processing, and how the faint outskirts are stretched. Yet the impression is consistent across vantage points, lines that stay themselves longer than casual intuition predicts. We hold that impression gently, test it against more nights, and let it inform the models we sketch in the margins. Let's let the images rest for a minute and listen to the house. A vent whispers. The floor accepts a tiny shift, and then becomes still. If a clock lives nearby, its pulse becomes a soft metronome that the breath can follow without effort. In for 3, out for 4. Or in for 4, out for 5, if that feels kinder. The body knows its own numerator and denominator. Eyes close half a degree more. The weight of the blanket speaks of safety rather than demand. The mind's garden remains, quietly watered by attention and ease. Returning, we look at the contrast between a kept stream and a common plume. In a diffuse outflow, gas lifts dust from many microfissures, making a fuzzier cone. In a channeled outflow, a vent or cleft can shape the gas so it moves together, a little faster, a little straighter, carrying grains along a narrower corridor before the larger environment pulls them apart. Particle size matters too. Larger grains resist the light's push longer. Smaller grains peel away early into the broader fan. Add rotation, and each stream writes a spiral of sorts into space. A gentle corkscrew that can look like a straight line when projected at the right angle. Collimation, then, is not a miracle, but a recipe. Source, size, speed, and spin. If we widen again, the halo becomes a pond where many streams enter. Some nights, 2 sunward-leaning strokes bracket a more conventional tail. Other nights, a ladder of quieter features crosses the halo, rungs faint but steady in longer stacks. Counts vary. Processing can enhance a line or let it vanish into the background. Exposure length decides how far out the pond's edge becomes visible. Wind at the observing site, humidity, and sky brightness all leave their fingerprints. Yet, across these variables, the idea that several kept streams exist holds, and with it, the invitation to explain steadiness, rather than to argue numbers. What makes steadiness interesting is what it could constrain. If a plume holds shape to great distances within the halo, its initial divergence must be small, which suggests a narrow source or a sustained condition at that spot on the surface. If the lines survive rotation without smearing into each other, the vents may be separated by enough angle or by topography that shields them from crosstalk. If two observers at different longitudes report the same lines on the same night, then the feature is not a processing artifact or a mere projection coincidence. It carries through the geometry with a character of its own. Those are patient clues, not alarms. Now tilt the page slightly and see time as a tool. Over successive nights, some kept streams appear to shift relative brightness, as if the local sun angle deepens one vent's warmth and slackens another's. The overall tail grows or fades with total activity, but the character of the narrow lines persists beyond a single night, hinting at stability in the way the surface releases gas. In certain frames, the streams curve very gently as they extend, not because the source turned mid-breath, but because the grains meet the solar wind and radiation pressure and accept their guidance. The garden simile returns. Even the best-kept stream becomes a mist at the far hedge. We could stop at the image and its grace, and that would be enough for a bedtime. Still, a soft forward step is allowed. Spectroscopy, listening to the light for Doppler shifts, can measure how quickly molecules move within these plumes. If speeds align with the hundreds of meters per second expected from warmed ices, the streams find a home in familiar models. If one plume speaks faster, we would check and check again. Geometry from a side view above Mars can tell whether the lines we see as parallel are truly distinct in space, or simply edges of a sheet viewed on the bias. Many eyes, many angles, quiet arithmetic. That is how a kept stream tells its story without raising its voice. I dim the lantern at the garden's edge. The streams continue, small and steady, their paths traced in silver across the halo pond. Leaves stir once, then settle. The gate closes with a soft click. We'll return by the same path tomorrow night, and the water will still be there, drawing thin lines across the quiet. I picture a kettle in a quiet kitchen. Steam threads lift from the spout, first loose, then gathered, then loose again as the room takes them. Closer to the metal, motion is quick and ordered. A span away, drift takes over and the whirls become soft. That is a good ladder to climb tonight. From tea steam to comet gas, from inches to kilometers, from a stove's warm breath to sunlight waking ices that have slept between stars. Near the surface of an icy traveller, heat meets crystal and turns solid into gas. The first push is brisk. In lab and model, that speed often falls in the world of a few hundred meters per second, not racing, not slow, but enough to carry grains up and out before other forces decide their path. Think again of the kettle. Close in, the stream is tight and eager, moving as one. A palm's width away, the air begins to nudge and the ribbon loosens. In space, radiation pressure and the solar wind play the role of the room, persuading each molecule and grain to join the larger weather. The opening conditions matter most for a heartbeat, and then the system's patience takes over. How do we learn the speed of something we cannot touch? We listen for the slight lean of light. When molecules move, the colors they emit or absorb slide by tiny amounts. That slide, the Doppler shift, tells us whether the motion is toward or away, and by how much. With a spectrograph, starlight is combed apart into threads. A narrow instrument slit and a grating spread those threads until a line appears with a center and a width. If the line drifts redward, the gas is edging away. If it leans blue, the gas is coming on. The amount of lean measured against a laboratory rest yields a speed. It is kitchen physics with jeweler's tools, careful and patient. Certain molecules speak more clearly than others. Hydroxyl, born when sunlight breaks water apart, has radio voices that live near 1 2/3 gigahertz, a quiet neighborhood where the sky's noise is low. In optical light, there are other traces, from carbon-based fragments to sodium glows, each with lines that can be measured for motion. Multiple lines let us cross-check. We can compare velocities of gas with the behavior of dust we infer from images and see if the story holds together across methods. Like tasting tea before it cools, testing tells us the brew's strength while it still carries heat. Let's pause the instruments for a minute and sit near the stove we imagined. The room is dim and safe. The kettle sighs once, then settles. You might hear a soft fan, or the hush of distant traffic smoothing into a single, even tone. Breathe as if you can feel warmth on your cheeks from a cup cradled in both hands. In through the nose for a gentle 3, out through the mouth for a longer 4. Shoulders drop a little. The spine finds a comfortable curve. You do not need to picture anything. You may simply let the warm drift of steam and thought rise together and thin into the room. When we return, we ask what different speeds would mean. If spectra show line centers and widths that match a few hundred meters per second, we nod toward sublimation from warmed ices doing exactly what models ask them to do. If a measured component leans faster, by factors that approach kilometers per second, we would not leap to conclusions. We would first check geometry, calibration, and whether we are seeing ions that are carried more tightly by the solar wind than heavier dust. Line width can reflect temperature and turbulence as much as bulk speed. A careful ear sorts melody from harmony and knows when a note is broadened by the hall rather than the singer. Timing matters because the kettle cools. After closest approach to the sun, activity declines with the dwindling heat. Gas release slows. The brightest lines fade into the general sky. Spectrographs that could take quick, clean measures in late October may need longer integrations in November to hear the same whisper. Longer integrations bring their own costs because the scene itself is evolving while you listen. We can still measure, but the signal must be coaxed with patience, and the error bars must be tended like seedlings. This is less a race than a weather window, where a clear hour is enough to learn something enduring. There is a pleasing harmony when images and spectra agree. A narrow plume that keeps its line in photographs suggests a channeled outflow. If the gas tied to that plume shows the expected velocities for sublimating water and its fragments, we can add a check mark beside the familiar. If parts of the plume's light imply higher speeds, we look for a cause consistent with nature's catalogue. Smaller ions coupling to the solar wind, a shock where fast gas meets a denser pocket, or a line of sight that stacks several flows into one apparent vector. The ladder we climb is built from modest rungs. Each rung is tested before we trust our weight to it. Dust tells its story differently. Grains do not sing in narrow lines. They scatter sunlight in broad colour. Their speeds are inferred from how the tail curves and how quickly kept streams lose coherence. Here again, the kettle analogy helps. Coarser droplets from the spout fall quickly. Fine mist follows the room's air. Larger grains hold course longer against radiation pressure. Tiny ones are swept into the classic tail with grace and speed. Matching a dust model to a set of images, while a gas model reads, the spectra builds a joined picture that rests comfortably in the hands. We keep an eye on the tool's limits. Spectrographs resolve to certain scales. Slit widths average over areas that may contain multiple flows. A line center can be shifted by blends and by faint background features. Calibration lamps and telluric standards tame some of that, but not all. On the imaging side, processing can tease out a filament or invent one if the stretch is pushed hard. That is why observers share raw and processed versions, and why multiple nights and sites are our allies. Agreement across methods and teams is the gentlest form of confidence. In the end, the kettle gives the chapter its last picture. Steam rises, drifts, thins, and disappears into a room that stays kind. Speeds teach, but they do so without drama. They are one link in a chain that runs from surface to sky. We will listen for them as long as the breath of the traveller is strong enough to be heard. Then we will rest our instruments the way we set a book aside at bedtime, with a thumb marking the page for morning. The next chapter will turn quietly, as if you can hear paper move. The warm drift carries us to the margin, where a page-turn hush waits. First, I lower the room to a whisper, and let the sound come in as a texture rather than a note. A hush with grains in it. The quiet between raindrops on a lake at night. That is how radio feels when you're close to the instruments and far from the speech. Across a dry plain, metal flowers turn their faces, and in their petals a small part of the sky becomes a stream you can listen to. We stand at the shore of that unseen water and wait for a soft green trace to rise along the dial. There is a part of the spectrum that radio astronomers have long called a friendly valley. Between the hydrogen line near 1.42 GHz and the hydroxyl pair near 1.66, the broader galaxy grows quieter. Fewer lightning pops, fewer stormy bands of static. Molecules whisper rather than shout. In that valley, a comet can shed water under sunlight, and fragments of that water will sing at those OH lines. They do not sing loudly. They are as modest as reeds around a midnight pond. But they are steady enough, and when a sensitive ear is turned their way, they can be heard. Let's set the instruments down for a breath, and let the ambience of the night fill the room. Picture standing by a real lake, a pinprick of insect sound, distant to the point of softness. The smooth lap of water against a small pier. Somewhere far, a car's tires whisper over a bridge and are gone. Your own breath settles into that sound field, so even that you forget who leads. The body loosens 1 degree at a time. The mind lowers its lantern and lets the shoreline widen without edges or plans. Now back to the plane and the dishes. In South Africa, a field of 64 antennas works as one ear, the signals from each dish braided into a single listening beam. It is not a single giant. It is a chorus tuned to the same key. When the array turns toward a traveller near the sun, it does so with care to avoid the blaze and still catch the faint. Late in October, as the days leaned toward the moment of closest approach, an observing run pressed its attention to the OH main lines around 1.665 to 1.667 GHz. What returned was a thread that rose and fell in the right place, at the right cadence, centered on the visitor's heart. Not a broadcast, not a message. A chemical breath, where water became its simpler parts, and those parts announced themselves by habit. The language of those lines is gentle but informative. An absorption dip says cooler gas lies in front of a warmer background, taking a little light out of the stream. An emission bump says the gas itself glows, pumped by sunlight and set to sing. In comets, both can happen, depending on where you listen and how you draw your beam across the scene. A centrally concentrated signature tells you the reaction zone is near the nucleus or within the tight inner coma, not spread across the whole halo equally. That is useful. It ties the radio whisper to the same place the images show dust and gas lifting most strongly. Two senses, one source. The word waterhole has another story in it, a cultural one about where patient listeners might gather if they wish to hear from far away. Tonight, we let the phrase keep only its geography in the spectrum. The presence of OH near 1.66 GHz is the straightforward chemistry of sunlight meeting ice. Break water and the pieces have voices at specific pitches. We are pleased, not startled, when those voices appear near perihelion, when heating is at its height. If anything, their timeliness reassures. The kettle was on the stove, the steam rose when we expected it to. Still, radio is a teaching friend because it speaks in velocities and widths. A narrow line with a small center shift tells of gas moving as expected for sublimation, a few hundred meters per second along our sight, broadened by temperature and the mix of motions within the beam. A wider line asks questions that can be answered without raising our voice. Is the beam too large, averaging over different streams? Are we catching ions held more tightly by the solar wind? Is a background line nudging the center? Each possibility can be explored by changing the slit of the instrument in optical studies, by adjusting the synthesized beam in radio, and by looking on more than one night. The lake stays calm. The work takes its time. I keep near the image of the lake at night because it fits the way data arrives. Long integrations pile seconds into minutes into hours. Noise evens out like ripples smoothing. A shallow trough deepens where the OH line rests. A crest rises where emission glows. The eye grows good at telling real curves from speckle. And when a detection holds across a sequence, staying with the object as it drifts against the stars, you can mark a small dot in the log and draw a quiet circle around it. Many such dots give a map, and the map needs no exclamation marks. When the report of a line near 1.66 arrived in early November with a date stamp from late October, the community nodded. It fit the calendar of warmth. It matched the chemistry of ice. It added one more door to the hallway of methods, a door that opens onto the same courtyard where images live. Through that door, other traces can be invited. Sodium's amber, carbon's ghostly lamps, cyanogen's greenish cast under dark skies. Each carries its own grammar. Together, they say, here is gas, here are speeds, here is a way to tie models to the shape you've been watching, in photographs. Sometimes the sky offers a historical echo and invites us to compare. we can accept the invitation and still stay calm. The band where hydrogen and hydroxyl live has been a place of dreams and careful work for half a century. Tonight, it is simply a place where a traveller's breath leaves a mark we can measure. It is enough to measure it well, to place it near the nucleus, to see if the velocity story agrees with the images, to add one more line to the ledger and make the next night's plan a little better. The waterhole is a tool, and tools are comforts when they fit the hand. If you like, take one more breath as if fog rises from a pond and disappears into the air after a few arms' lengths. In through the nose, out with the slowest, easiest release you can make without trying. Shoulders soften as the last of the tension leaves the day. Somewhere far off, a quiet dish turns on its pedestal to a new field, and you barely hear it at all. The soft green trace has done its work. We let it go, and let the breath go with it, easy and complete. At low tide, I draw orbits on damp sand with a fingertip. First, a circle that returns to itself, the way a familiar comet keeps coming home. Then, an oval, stretched and sleepy. Last, a wide curve that never closes, a path that enters, swings by the fire, and leaves for good. The sea takes a breath, smooths the edges, and the picture is complete. This chalkboard in sand is enough to hold what we need tonight. Our visitor travels the open curve. Its eccentricity sits beyond the tidy boundary where loops live, so the story it writes in our sky is a visit, not a residency. The curve is not aimed at us. It is a passage shaped by the sun and by small pulls that add up over long lanes of time. Those small pulls deserve their own quiet naming. When astronomers fit a comet's path, they start with gravity's clean handwriting, and then allow for little nudges that real surfaces make when warmed. The model assigns 3 gentle components, one along the sun-comet line, one along the direction of motion, and one out of the plane. They wear simple labels and modest units, because they are not thunder, only breath. Outgassing can push just enough to bend prediction by hairbreadths, and those hairbreadths matter when you are projecting weeks and months forward. The fit improves, the curve smooths. It isn't proof of engines, it is the ordinary physics of ice meeting light, entered into the ledger with care. Perihelion, the swing by the fire, is where materials remember what they can bear. Heating climbs. Tides from the sun's pull work at weak seams. Some fragile travellers fragment into strings or dust. We have watched that happen before and learned from the debris. Others take on a brighter breath, vents opening like morning glories as fresh ice meets day. Our visitor chose the second path, held together, then spoke more, strongly. Jets strengthened, threads multiplied, and the surrounding haze grew hushed and large before thinning again as distance returned. The sun is a patient teacher in this. It asks the same question of every body that passes close. What are you made of? And how tightly are you held? Tracking the answer is a quiet craft. Night after night, telescopes mark the traveller's place against the fixed stars. Tiny points measured to fractions of an arcsecond, then compared to last night's points and the ones before. The coordinates feed a solver that balances all the pulls, large and small, and updates the path. With enough nights, the uncertainties shrink. With enough sights, the pattern of residuals, those little differences between where a model predicts and where the sky places, tells whether the small pulls should be added to the ledger. Tracking shows changes in path. It does not, by itself, name causes with certainty. That is the humility we keep beside the thrill of precision. Sometimes people ask whether a swing around the sun is a slingshot. In a word, yes, though the word is softer than it sounds. A body falls inward, trades height for speed, and leaves carrying a different direction than it brought in, its energy reckoned in the frame of the star it passed. We learned to borrow that dance for our own craft. Probes brushed past giant planets and left on new headings, faster than their engines alone could grant. The math is the same for rocks and for robots. For a natural visitor on an open curve, the sun's embrace bends the track and sends it on, quiet and inevitable. The small pulls ride on top of that, like ripples on a turning tide. Let the chalkboard rest while we stand on the real strand. The tide murmurs over a lace of shells. Far down the beach, a buoy bell taps just once. Above, stars polish themselves against the black until a faint river appears, and then the river fades. Air cools the skin by a degree, and then holds there. Your breath squares itself to an easy measure. 4 in, a short pause, 5 out, and the shoulders answer by loosening a notch. In the near distance, a low wave lays itself down so gently that it becomes more seen than heard. We stay with that, uncomplicated and complete, as if the sky is practicing our pace for us. Back at the sand, the curve we drew still shows its open hand. The small pulls we wrote as 3 tidy components remind us that models are stories that make room for reality. When a path seems to drift from gravity's simple arc, we first ask whether our measurements carry a tiny bias. We ask whether sunlight pressure on dust could shift the apparent center, or whether a particular jet on the surface breathed more on one side of the spin than the other. We do not leap. We let multiple nights vote, and we let many eyes compare notes. Confidence here means repetition, more than rhetoric, perihelion as a stress. Point explains other gentler things too. Heat soaks deeper. Subsurface pockets widen into channels. A jet that was intermittent becomes steady for a spell. If a small, steady push is present for days, the fitted terms along and across the motion can tick up ever so slightly, like a metronome raised by a single click. Later, as distance grows and the stove cools, those terms tick back down towards 0, and the path resumes the look of pure falling and flying. The craft of orbit making is to capture that rise and fall without pretending it means more than it does. What tracking can show clearly are positions and times. From those, it can show a shape that fits best, and how that shape changes when you allow the small pulls to breathe. What tracking cannot do alone is decide whether a push came from this vent or that cleft, or whether a plume was dust-rich or gas-rich. For that, we marry the curve to the pictures and the spectra. A fitted sideways nudge that lines up with a persistent plume seen on the same nights is a satisfying harmony. A nudge that appears only when the data are thin is a cue to observe again before writing a conclusion in ink. It helps to remember our own practice at gravity's shoreline. We sent a pair of craft into the giant planet's courts and let those courts curve the paths outward, step by step, until the probes found the interstellar wind. We launched a small craft toward a distant dwarf world and let a passing brush with a gas giant turn months into speed. These were orchestrations of the same quiet mathematics that shape a comet's turn by the sun. The difference is intention, and the sky does not wear intention as clothing. It wears it, if at all, as a pattern of measured facts we can set beside our models with care. So we end the lesson with the sand smoothing itself. An open curve, small pulls, a swing by the fire, a slow exhale into distance. The tide is coming in now. The chalkboard will erase itself, and that feels right. The path is better kept in the night's ledger anyway, with numbers tucked into the margins and soft annotations about weather, seeing, and the hum of the dome. When you look up before sleep, the stars keep their places, and the faint trace of our visitor glides among them, unhurried. The glow of it lingers the way starlight lingers on a window pane long after you've turned the lamp down. That is enough for tonight. I imagine the traveller as a vessel set into a kiln, not to fire it to brittleness, but to temper what already holds. The outer layer's warm, the inner keeps its cool for a time, and between them a gradient writes tiny stresses through pores and veins. In that quiet furnace near the sun, some bodies fail, some tighten. Tonight we keep company with the ones that hold together, and we ask, in a soft voice, what quiet strengths allow that holding? The tempered shell becomes our leitmotif, a skin taught by heat to behave. Closest to the sun, materials are asked hard questions. Dusty mantles crack and reseal. Ices sublimate and leave scaffolds of grains. Voids open into vents. If the nucleus is a loose rubble pile, tidal pulls and thermal gradients can make it unzip into strands. If the nucleus is cohesive enough, the same forces open controlled seams instead of rifts, and the body exhales without breaking. We are watching the second story here, a survivor that emerged with more breath rather than fewer pieces. The kiln did not devour it. It only taught it to speak. We have seen the other outcome. One winter, in our recent memory, a sun grazer brightened, and then came apart as it raced the sun, leaving a lace of dust where a head had been. In another season, a long chain of fragments, already torn by a giant planet's pull, fell one by one into a world's cloud tops in dark, blooming marks. Those memories are part of why calm survival feels beautiful. Against those histories, a single nucleus that keeps its shape is a kind of grace. Let the examples settle, and the room grow still. A night window darkens to a gentle mirror. A vent's whisper runs under the silence like a distant tide on stones. Somewhere a radiator ticks once, then yields. Breath softens, 4 in, 5 out, as if the glass itself is exhaling a faint mist. You rest your gaze on nothing in particular until the shapes behind the pane blur into one charcoal tone. The mind's kiln cools by a few degrees, and the shell in your thoughts holds. What helps a nucleus survive, aside from luck? Cohesion in the near surface can come from sintering, where heat presses grains into better contact, so that a crust takes on the work of a skin. Organics can act like binders. Salts and trapped gases can both weaken and strengthen, depending on where they sit and how quickly they move. Porosity spreads stress if pores are small and well connected. It concentrates stress if voids are large and few. A slower spin reduces centrifugal pull on weak seams. A faster spin invites shedding along the waist first. In the kiln metaphor, the piece that cools evenly, free of sudden drafts, avoids cracking. The one with thin spots fails at the thinnest point. our traveller seems to have the first fortune. Emergence with more breath than before. The heating is its own gentle signature. When light returns after the glare, images show a halo grown generous and several jets that keep their shape over long spans before they join the common fan. New vents likely opened where stress found old fractures or where the thermal wave reached fresh ices. A survivor's language is plural, many small voices layered rather than one bright shout. The object did not come apart, it began to articulate. That is a quiet difference, and it matters. Geometry can hint at strength. When plumes keep their collimation deep into the halo, the throats that feed them must be narrow and persistent. When lines hold their own through a rotation or two, their sources are separated enough in angle or sheltered by topography so they do not blur each other. When a sunward-looking thread appears alongside an ordinary tail night after night, the dust plane is stable and well supplied, implying that the surface is neither crumbling wholesale nor smearing its releases across every face. Patterns like these do not prove a hardened rind, but they speak of it the way a steady tone speaks of a sound instrument. I like the kiln as a place for thinking because it encourages care. You do not yank a door open to peek. You read the heat by glow and by time. You accept that some of the most important changes happen unseen in the gradient between crust and core. In space, we do much the same. We infer the shell's condition from the way jets behave, from how the halo fattens or thins, from whether the nucleus shows any sign of parting. A tempered shell is not armor. It is a balance, and balances change as heating wanes. If our visitor remains articulate as it cools, the lesson will be about endurance, not spectacle. Uncertainty deserves kindness. We cannot yet hold the piece in our hands. We cannot tap it for a ring that tells it's firing. We wait on side views from a camera that watched from another window. We wait on spectra that can say how quickly the breath is moving in those plumes, and on photometry that can hint at rotation and its steadiness. The outline we sketch tonight is careful. Survival without shattering. Increased activity after the ordeal. Jets with character. A halo that reached far, and then began to fade. The lines between those notes, what the shell is made of, how strength is distributed, will sharpen as more measures arrive. It is tempting, when jets arrange themselves in neat arcs, to call it design. Better, for now, to call it order, born from boundary conditions. Discrete vents on a surface with particular slopes and shadows can produce symmetry no less than intention can. A kiln leaves repeating marks on every item set on the same shelf. That does not make the pieces identical in spirit. We watch for repetition across nights and across angles. We test whether the same lines persist when geometry changes. A pattern that survives those changes earns a bolder pencil. A pattern that fades on a side view returns to a lighter sketch. There is a softness in knowing that strength can be quiet. Not the strength that resists all change, but the kind that changes in ways that keep a whole intact. The tempered shell releases gas where it must and holds where it can. It accepts the sun's question and answers with structure instead of breakage. In that answer, we learn how surfaces knit themselves, how vents do the work of valves, how dust planes collect what pours from throats and lay it down into threads we can follow with our eyes. For a bedtime, that is enough mechanism, and more than enough grace. I leave you at the night window again. Your reflection has almost vanished. The room behind you is a soft suggestion. Outside, the stars feel nearer than they are. Somewhere far in that black, a small, tempered thing moves on with quiet dignity, its shell still warm, its breath still visible. We'll look in on the ways we share such seeing next, the paths data take from careful hands to open shelves, and we'll keep the room as dim and patient as now, so the sight can settle. For this moment, we let the view rest and take one slow step back from the glass. I like to tell the story of an image as if it were a loaf. First, there is the mixing bowl, where photons and silicon meet. The batter is electric, a pattern laid down as charge across a wafer that has waited in cold silence for just this moment. Then, there is the oven of the spacecraft, where that pattern is read, packed into tidy parcels, and sent across deep space along a path of radio light. On Earth, hands receive it in a warm kitchen of antennas and recorders. The loaf is not ready for the table yet. It sits on a cooling rack, and the room fills with a quiet, invisible smell of numbers. From rack to counter, a routine begins. Technicians and software remove the hiss that every detector carries, subtracting bias frames and dark current, trimming the stray glints that electronics sometimes create. Flat fields, even the surface, so one pixel doesn't pretend to be brighter than its neighbor, simply because of a wrinkle in sensitivity. Geometry comes next. Tiny distortions are nudged back into place, so the sky does not bow or warp. Timestamps are checked against clocks, so that a feature seen by one instrument can meet the same feature in another without confusion. Each of these steps is ordinary, and ordinariness is a comfort in science. It keeps the bread from collapsing. There is also an index card that travels with every loaf. On it are notes about where the craft was, how it pointed, and which calibration files were used. Ephemerides and kernels, the quiet maps that tell where everything was at each second, are attached. If a cosmic ray scratched a bright streak across the sensor, the card mentions it. If scattered sunlight crept in near the frame edge, a line is added. This is not drama. It is bookkeeping as care. Later, when an analyst asks why a thread in the halo leans one way on one night and another way the next, the card helps separate the sky's truth from the instrument's habits. Some trays leave the kitchen faster than others. Routine frames flow through archives that anyone can visit, where labels like Level 0, Level 1, and Level 2 describe how much cooling and slicing the loaf has had. Other trays carry a small cloth over them for a little while. The cloth is not a lock. It is a signal to wait a moment so the team can add context and words to guide first impressions. An image that will be shown in a press room arrives with a caption so people don't mistake the crust for the crumb, the glare for the structure. Internal flags help coordinate that timing, especially when the scene is unusual or when many instruments must speak together. The cloth lifts inevitably. It is made to lift. Let us rest the counter and dim the kitchen for a minute. The room you are in is warm enough that you forget the air. A soft fan hums, smoothing into a single note you can match your breath to without trying. In, out, a fraction longer. Somewhere fabric shifts, and then becomes still. You could imagine the faint tick of a cooling rack if you like. Or you could let the picture go completely and listen only to the evenness between the sounds. The shoulders drop by a finger's width. The jaw releases without effort. There is nothing in the oven that needs your attention. The bread will cool on its own. Outside the kitchen, other rooms are busy in a gentler way. One is the circular desk where positions and motions are posted quickly for anyone guiding a telescope tonight. The notes there are concise, written for speed and clarity, and they land in public the way a station schedule lands on a wall. Another room is for brief alerts when something new appears, a fragment, a brightening, a tale that grows faster than expected. The goal is rhythm. Observations in, notices out, follow-up planned, credit shared. Professional observatories, small domes at schools, backyard rigs under excellent skies. Each can pull a chair to the same table if the notes arrive in time and in a tone that welcomes help. You and I also live in the room where images are posted with open pride. A frame from a hillside, a stack from a suburban yard, a deep sequence from a grant-funded night. Captions give exposure times, filter names, and a few words about the seeing. Sometimes a stretch enhances a filament. Sometimes it hides it. When many people try, the picture deepens, and the community learns which recipes reveal features without inventing them. Quiet norms emerge, show the raw beside the processed when you can, name the steps, note the limits. These are the manners of a shared kitchen. Patience is a tool here, not a delay. An image rushed to the table might look dramatic, but taste odd if calibration was still warm and the knife still dull. Give it an hour, a day, and the error bars shrink like steam leaving a crust. Backgrounds are measured more cleanly. Stray light is mapped and removed. Faint structures are checked against known artifacts. The result is not only prettier, it is safer to build upon. Models that fit a cooled, well-sliced loaf do not crumble when the next tray arrives. Across months, that is the difference between a stack of clever pictures and a body of work that holds its shape. There is also the human rhythm of communications. Teams have calendars and institutions have windows in which certain announcements are made. A pause can happen when a holiday or a policy change sweeps through the corridor. Those pauses are not verdicts. The antennas keep listening. Pipelines keep running. The cloth over a tray may stay a little longer in those times, and then lift as quietly as it was placed. If you have ever waited for a night stack to finish while the software subtracts the sky, one patient layer at a time, you already know this feeling. It is part of the craft. I sometimes think of the archive as a bakery case with clear glass. Loaves sit with small cards. Date, instrument, processing level, notes. You may take one for study, cut thin or thick slices. Toast gently with your own methods and share what you make, provided you keep the label with it. When a new loaf arrives from the same batch, you can compare crumb and crust, decide whether the recipe changed, and adjust your palate. The case is not a museum, it is a pantry in use. That is what makes it satisfying to visit even on quiet days. When we move from spacecraft images to the nightly coordinates that keep telescopes pointed, speed matters more, and so the recipes are different. There, prompt notices are the norm. A new position, an updated uncertainty, a note that the path bent a hair. These are posted as soon as they are baked enough to hold their shape. Later, longer papers review the season's bread in detail. The two are not in conflict. They are two shelves in the same kitchen, one marked tonight, one marked for the record. Good practice means you can trust both for what they are. By now, you can feel how these processes lower the pulse rather than raise it. We let calibration finish. We share coordinates fast and images carefully. We write down uncertainties where everyone can see them. And when a scene is lively and many frames are in motion, internal flags may gather them briefly, so a set can be released with the context that keeps misunderstandings from multiplying. The cloth lifts, the glass case fills. People stop by, take what they need, leave thanks, and bring back results to set on the counter beside the original loaf. It is a good kitchen. If you wish, pull the blanket a little higher on your shoulder. Let one more exhale lengthen by the smallest measure. The oven light is off. A soft glow from the hallway is enough. The last tray has cooled. Cards are clipped to the edge. In the morning, the case will be full, and you can choose what to taste first. For now, we tuck the corner in, smooth the cover once, and leave the kitchen to its quiet hum. Tiny tiles arrive each night, corners still cool from the air. A square of grey from a hillside in Italy. Another from a high desert where dust sleeps between stones. One from the edge of a city where sodium lamps make a faint honey veil at the horizon. In each tile, the same traveller, slightly shifted, slightly softened, holds the centre. Laid together, they become a quilt of seeing, stitched light across longitudes, a pattern stronger than any single cloth. We lean over the table and smooth the seams with the palms of our hands. Some tiles come from an online observatory whose dome opens to the Roman night. Its live stream, a kind of village square, where people gather, whisper, and point out the day's changes. Others carry the careful hand of a backyard rig, mount balanced, cables tamed, focus checked by breath. School domes contribute, their ceilings rolling like quiet thunder before settling into place. On clear runs, after the late October swing by the sun, these places kept a cadence, image, align, stack, share. Not for spectacle, but because many eyes make one sky steadier. Across that week and more, the tale knew how to grow. Early frames showed a modest sweep, bright near the head and cautious at the edge. Soon, with longer exposures and improved stretch, the sweep reached outward with a slow confidence. Not a leap, but a daily gain you could feel when 2 nights' tiles were set side by side. The halo's soft field spread, and within it kept lines traced farther than before, like chalk that had found a drier slate. In captions, observers noted the same thing in different words, and the agreement was its own comfort. Consistency across distance matters. When a feature survives a change of vantage, Europe to Africa, the Americas to the Philippines, it earns weight. A filament that shows as a rung in one place and a thread in another can still be the same flow, its face turned differently to each lens. A pair of sunward-leaning strokes framing the broader tale on one night, then appearing again from another country the next, says we aren't looking at a trick of processing, but at geometry that belongs to the object. The quilt's design is not a rumour. It holds when you pull gently at the corners. Cadence is an art. Long exposures collect signal. Long nights collect changes. Some work with non-sidereal tracking, the mount following the traveller, while stars become soft trails that later help test alignment. Others use shorter exposures and register on the object in software. letting point stars be the proof of the plate. Median stacks hush, cosmic ray scratches. Sigma clipping keeps airplanes from drawing their brief, bright graffiti across the frame. Flats and darks are the bread and salt of the effort, the small hospitality that makes a guest comfortable enough to show detail. None of this is exotic. All of it is care. Let's rest our own eyes and listen for the quiet that lives under this shared work. A fan becomes a single ribbon of sound in the room. Fabric shifts once and then stills. If there is traffic, it is so far that it smooths into a noise without edges. In for 4, pause 1, out for 5. Shoulders lower a notch. The quilt on your lap grows heavier by the smallest degree, as if it agrees to keep you. Thoughts arrive like soft lint and are brushed away without fuss. The night has room for everyone's small tile. Back at the table, we notice how different recipes reveal and conceal. A gentle stretch shows the big shapes, friendly to the eye. A deeper stretch coaxes filaments, but courts artifacts if pushed too far. One observer's green filter reveals gas faintly, where another's broad luminance focuses on dust. A night of thin cirrus may hide the outskirts. A night of crystalline transparency all but erases the boundary between halo and sky. When tiles travel with their recipes, exposure, filters, seeing, the mosaic can be read honestly. It is the same with a piecewise quilt. You love the colors more when you know the cloth they came from. Many eyes enable the next steps. With a ledger of angles and dates, one team measures the position angles of the brightest plumes, night by night, watching for a slow precession that might whisper the rotation period. Another group traces the faint outer edge of the tail, translating pixels into kilometers under the sky's scale, and writes a calm line about growth. Photometry with matched apertures tries to keep score without confusing the score with the lighting. When the halo glows more, is it because of better sky or better breath? Coordination makes these questions answerable. You cannot do it alone and be sure. Small rituals keep the quilt square. Posting raw frames alongside processed stacks lets others test the stretch. Sharing the plate solution, what the stars say about where the camera was really pointed, keeps measurements honest across sites. Noting wind, humidity, and cloud looks like weather talk, but becomes physics when a faint feature is missing, and you need to know whether it was the sky or the source. Even the way we label axes on shared plots matters. Clear scales avoid the tall tales that charts can tell when left to their own impulses. The manners of many eyes are simple. Explain enough that your neighbor can follow and repeat. There's a gentle joy in the way differences harmonize. A small refractor's wide field captures the whole halo as a single breath. A larger scope's narrow gaze picks out the kept streams threading through it. One site's early evening meets another's near dawn, and the object moves seamlessly across the Earth's rotation, as if handed from friend to friend around a darkened room. The planet itself becomes a slow mount, turning so that the exposure never really stops. That is what one sky means on nights like these. The quilt grows while you sleep. Sometimes coordination ripples outward. A clean sequence of images catches someone's eye at a radio array. They schedule a listen, the next clear slot. A report of a slight brightening near the head nudges a spectrograph's plan from one target to another. An update to the astrometry gives the next night's hunters a tighter box to aim for. In each case, The cost is modest, the gain shared, and the tone still low. The effect is gradual, never a rush, like a tide that knows its work and does not make a speech about it. We end where we began, palms smoothing the seams. Tiles from many places lie flat together. The stitches are neat. The tale is longer in this corner than it was a few nights ago. The kept streams keep their character along several edges. The halo breathes lighter at the rim. It will change again, and the quilt will accept new pieces without complaint. You can feel the room find a coast is clear hush, that small relief when a pattern is clear enough to rest with. We turn off the lamp above the table and leave the mosaic glowing faintly in the dark, as if the cloth remembered the hands that made it. I'll name what we can hold tonight, and then we'll set it gently down. A visitor from beyond our closed paths passed the sun and kept its shape. After the glare, it returned to night skies, with a broadened hush around it, and more than one narrow plume that stayed itself longer than a casual glance would expect. From some seats on earth, thin threads seemed to lean sunward. From others, the same threads folded into a larger fan. A radio ear listened near the quiet valley in the spectrum where water's fragments speak, and there the breath of the traveller was heard. A camera circling Mars turned for a side look that will help us read depth when its pages reach the shelf. These are steady stones. They sit well in the palm. Now I'll name what belongs to plausible workings, and will keep the tone mild. Dust feels the sun's push and drifts into a tail that points away. Ions feel the wind and draw a straighter line. Rotation and surface features guide gas into channels, so some plumes hold shape, some blur, and a plane of grains along the path can masquerade as a sunward thread when we peer along its edge. Near the sun, warmth cracks old seams and opens new vents. Afterward, as distance grows, the breath slows, the halo thins, and the lines soften into the background. Instruments can read speeds from light, and images can trace the way patterns move from night to night. Together, they make a story that is gentle and testable. I'll also name what is pending, so it can rest instead of worry us. The side view from Mars, which looked when geometry was kind, will tell whether the threads we saw were planes held on edge or distinct plumes with true lean. Long listens in the radio band and quiet optical spectra can place velocities in the familiar range or ask for a new note to be explained. The nightly ledger of positions will let small non-gravitational pushes be written in their modest terms and compared with what images show. All of it will arrive by the usual routes. A cooling rack of calibration, a caption. That means well. A drawer in an archive where anyone can pull a loaf and slice it cleanly. Let me set a larger frame at the back of the room. In the seasons ahead, new surveys will comb the sky with a patience made of pixels and cadence. Dozens more visitors from other suns may cross our lights. Some will be like the textbook case we already trust. Some will be puzzles in small ways, asking for better angles and more nights. A few will earn a cornerfold in the ledger, a sign that many hands paused there and returned often. When the sample grows, our sense of normal will breathe and widen, and the pieces that once felt singular will find their families. That prospect lowers the pulse. It promises that answers can be found in daylight, not demanded in a shout. I'll name too the boundary where we stop. It is natural to wonder whether a neat arrangement of lines is a design. Tonight, we do not lean there. We keep the possibilities on the far shelf and return to the tools we can test. We let patience do its work. More angles, more spectra, more nights set alongside each other. If a pattern holds across those crossings, we write the pencil line darker. If it fades on a side view, we erase without regret, knowing correction is not defeat, but craft. The quiet strength of this practice is that it leaves room for surprise and room for sleep. Take one slow breath with me. In, out, a touch longer. Shoulders drop a notch. The jaw softens, and the eyes agree to be heavier by a small, kind degree. The room is dim enough that furniture becomes tone instead of shape. The mind lays out what we can keep. Late autumn nights, a broadened halo, kept streams that travel far before they thin, a radio whisper in the water's neighborhood, a promise of depth from a camera that watched from the side. The rest drifts to the table's edge and waits for morning without asking to be solved. We can offer thanks, quietly, to the many eyes that made one sky. A hillside dome under a Roman night. A backyard rig that hummed in a suburb and still found grace. A school roof that rolled open with a sound like distant weather. An array of dishes in a dry plain, braiding faintness into a line that held. A small room orbiting Mars, turning its long eye away from dunes to watch a passer-by. The kitchen that cooled the loaves, the glass case where they were set. The hands that left labels and invited others to slice and share. The gratitude doesn't need ceremony. It is a tide that comes in by itself and leaves the sand smooth. Here is the part where we imagine the sky without learning anything new. A window pane holds a small, quiet star. A fainter trace moves among the fixed points, unhurried. The glow you've been following is thinner now, and that is all right. It is a sign that warmth is lessening, and that the traveller is carrying on. You stand in a doorway that opens to a late-night yard, and the air is exactly as cool as you wish it to be. A leaf lifts, then lies still. The house behind you sighs once and is content. You know enough for tonight. The rest can wait. So I'll name one last thing, and then darken the room. We keep the firm stones. We place the plausible workings beside them. We set the pending measures where they belong. On a shelf we will visit again. We leave the far shelf what-ifs in their boxes, unprovoked, unneeded. The ember list glows, then dims. Your breath is easy. The chapter steps back on quiet feet and draws the curtain without a sound, dim to black and rest. We'll close with the pieces that felt sure in the hand. A traveller from outside our closed loops came near the sun and kept its shape. After the bright crossing, many eyes saw a soft halo and several narrow plumes that held together before they thinned. In the friendly valley of radio, water's broken voice was heard near the heart of the glow, a quiet match to what warmth would make. From a different seat above Mars, a camera looked for depth, and those pages will join the shelf when their journey through careful hands is done. Night after night, the tale lengthened, then gentled. None of this asked for hurry. We spoke of how light pushes dust and wind carries ions, how rotation and terrain can give a plume a kept line for a while, how a plane of grains can look like a thread that leans toward the sun when we peer along its edge. We let the pending measures rest where they belong, side views to sort geometry, spectra to place speeds, small path nudges to be weighed against the images. We left the far shelf undisturbed, so here, at the end, the room can grow dark with ease. You have what you need for sleep: a handful of true notes, a few kind explanations, and the permission to let the rest wait for morning. The window is a dim square, the night is a calm field. Somewhere above that field, a faint traveller moves on, thinning its breath, content to be measured, and then forgotten by tired eyes. Thank you for letting me keep the watch with you. May your breath be even, your dreams untroubled, and your curiosity wake gently with the light. Good night.